My mentally ill wife tormented me for years, and when I threatened to report her, she told me if I do that, she'll hurt herself and tell the police I did it. When I told her she couldn't get away with that, she doubled down and said, "Nobody ever believes the man." I froze in shock. Fast forward to now. They did believe the man, and her life will never be the same. When I first met Melissa, she was the sweetest person ever. She was a petite 5'1" girl that made me feel special. She made me feel seen, heard. We got married after just a year of dating. In hindsight, we went too fast for my liking, but she brushed my concerns off and convinced me it was a good idea. Sure enough, she was right at first. We were still in the honeymoon phase, all love-dovey, and we even had twins. Sure, we had some disagreements here and there about the kids, but nothing crazy. But then slowly, things changed. It started with mood swings. Erratic, violent mood swings. She'd yell and make the babies cry, then later apologize and swear it would never happen again. But then she started putting me down in front of her friends. It was just little jokes, but personal ones. Still, I laughed them off because it felt easier than making a scene. Besides, I loved her. I figured maybe I deserved it somehow. The real shift happened so slowly, I didn't even realize it until it was too late. It went from shouting to name-calling. Then the slaps began. At first it was just during arguments. She would cry afterward and swear she wouldn't do that again. I believed her. But after a while, the apologies stopped. She started threatening me instead. I wanted to pack my things and leave, but I couldn't leave the kids with her. It was too dangerous. I remember thinking I needed to report her, but when I threatened her that I was going to call the cops, she mockingly said that if I ever told anyone she was abusing me, she would hurt herself and blame me. She even went into the bathroom and bruised her stomach there and then, just to prove she was capable. She told me over and over that no one believes a man who claims he's being abused. She even showed me news stories about abused fathers losing custody battles. That was the moment I gave up. I knew she had the upper hand. There was nothing I could do, so I just retreated into myself. I stopped seeing my family and friends because she made it too difficult. I had bruises I could not explain. I missed work because of injuries. I lied so much it started feeling like the truth. My friend Ray was one of the only people who still talked to me. He was the first person who asked if I was okay. One day I showed up to work with a broken finger. I said it was a work accident, but even I could hear how weak I sounded. Ray pulled me aside. I tried to brush it off, but he wouldn't let me. He said his sister had been through something similar. He said he knew the signs. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, to keep lying, but I couldn't. That night, Melissa went through my phone as she did every night, and she found texts from Ray asking if I needed help. She lost it. She smashed my phone into the wall and beat me with a pan. The kids were in their rooms crying, and I could hear Jack sobbing into his blanket. Afterward, Melissa sat on the couch like nothing happened. After that night, our kids visibly changed. Emma stopped talking. Jack started wetting the bed. Their teachers called home with concerns. Melissa handled it like she always did. She blamed me. She told them I was angry and unstable. Meanwhile, at work, I started secretly researching shelters and resources. Everything I found scared me even more. The courts were not kind to fathers. It felt like no matter what I did, it was pointless. But then Ray introduced me to his sister, who survived something similar. She got me connected with a counselor who specialized in helping men like me. She helped me start documenting my injuries in private. I finally had a plan. But then Melissa found out what I was doing 2 months later. I don't know how, but when she did, she snapped. She launched boiling water at me. It hit my chest and my arms. I screamed from the pain. I tried to back away, but she cornered me and started laying into me. Emma came running out of her room crying, begging her to stop. Melissa shoved her into the wall, and Emma crumpled to the floor. That was it. That was the moment something inside me broke. Through the burning pain and panic, I remembered the recorder hidden inside my phone case. I turned it on without her noticing. My voice was shaking while I asked her why she does this to us. And in a fit of rage, she started ranting, screaming about how she owned me, how she could destroy me anytime she wanted. Every word of hers was caught on tape. Every hit, every slap, every scream. When she finally went upstairs to take a shower later, I grabbed the kids. I wrapped Emma and Jack up in blankets and carried them out to the car. My arms were raw and burned, and I could barely hold the steering wheel. My heart was hammering, but we drove to Ray's house. He opened the door without a word and just pulled all of us inside. Hospital, now. I shook my head, wincing at the movement. The kids, I said, my voice hoarse from screaming earlier. I can't leave them. The thought of being separated from them, even for medical treatment, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Ray's girlfriend Tanya came downstairs, her hair mussed from sleep, wearing flannel pajamas. She took one look at the situation and immediately took charge of the twins. There was no judgment in her eyes, just compassion and a quiet efficiency that I was immensely grateful for. She got them settled on the couch with juice and cookies, while Ray convinced me to let him look at my burns. They were bad, blistering already, and starting to ooze clear fluid that stuck to what remained of my shirt. The fabric had melted into my skin in places, creating a grotesque patchwork of cotton and flesh. Ray wanted to call an ambulance, but I was terrified of what might happen if I went to the hospital. She'll find us, I explained, my voice shaking with exhaustion and fear. She'll say I kidnapped the kids. The thought of Melissa showing up at the hospital, playing the role of concerned wife while secretly plotting to take the twins back, made my blood run cold. This is abuse, Ray said firmly, his hand on my shoulder, one of the few places that wasn't burned. You need medical attention, and we need to call the police. His eyes were steady, his voice calm, but insistent. I pulled out the recorder with trembling hands, the small device feeling impossibly heavy. I got it, I said, a mix of disbelief and hope in my voice. I recorded everything. The evidence I'd been too afraid to collect for years was now safely captured. Melissa's threats and violence preserved in digital form. That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep, even after Ray convinced me to take some pain medication he had left over from dental surgery. The pills dulled the burning sensation to a persistent throb, but couldn't touch the anxiety that kept my mind racing. I just held the twins while they slept, their small bodies finally relaxed in slumber, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what would come next. I knew the real fight was just beginning. Melissa wouldn't let us go easily. Sure enough, my phone started blowing up with texts around 3 a.m. Ray had given me his old phone to use, and I'd messaged Melissa to tell her we were safe, but needed space. Her responses quickly escalated from confusion to rage to threats. The first messages feigned concern, asking where we were and if the kids were okay. Then came accusations that I was trying to turn them against her. By morning, she was threatening to call the police and report that I'd kidnapped the kids, to tell them I was mentally unstable and dangerous. Ray helped me contact the lawyer I'd been speaking with secretly, a woman named Diane who specialized in domestic violence cases. I'd found her through an online support forum, but had been too afraid to take concrete action until now. She agreed to meet us at her office that morning. I was nervous about taking the kids out in public, worried that Melissa might be looking for us, but we couldn't stay hidden forever. The lawyer, Diane, listened to the recording with a grim expression, her fingers steepled under her chin. The sound of Melissa's rage filled the small office, punctuated by the twins crying and the sickening thud of Emma hitting the wall. When it finished, she looked at me with determined eyes, a fire burning behind her professional demeanor. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, her voice steady and reassuring, "but you need medical documentation of those burns. We need to get you to a hospital." She explained that physical evidence would strengthen our case immeasurably. I was still resistant, the fear of Melissa finding us overriding my concern for my own health, but Diane explained that without medical records, Melissa could claim I'd hurt myself. She could spin a story about me being mentally unstable, engaging in self-harm to frame her. Ray offered to stay with the kids at the law office while Diane took me to the ER. I hated leaving Emma and Jack, but I knew it was necessary. The ER doctor was professional but clearly suspicious when I explained that my wife had thrown boiling water on me. I could see the doubt in his eyes, the unspoken question of how a small woman could do this to a grown man. There was that moment of hesitation I'd always feared, the subtle shift in his expression that said he wasn't sure whether to believe me. But when Diane identified herself as my lawyer and explained the situation, his demeanor changed. He documented everything meticulously, taking photos of the burns and noting the pattern consistent with thrown liquid. The treatment was excruciating. They had to debride the burns, removing dead skin and cleaning the wounds to prevent infection. I gripped the sides of the examination table as they worked, sweat beading on my forehead despite the pain medication they'd administered. The doctor explained that I had second-degree burns across much of my chest and arms, with a few small areas of third-degree burns where the water had been hottest. He warned that I might need skin grafts if the burns didn't heal properly. While I was being treated, Melissa was busy crafting her own narrative. She'd called the police to report that I'd assaulted her and kidnapped our children. By the time we left the hospital, there was an APB out for me. Diane immediately contacted the police department to explain the situation. She arranged for us to go to the station with the evidence we had. I was terrified walking into that police station. Everything Melissa had told me about how male victims aren't believed was playing on repeat in my head. The statistics I'd read online about how rarely domestic violence against men is taken seriously flashed through my mind. The twins clung to me, sensing my anxiety. But having Ray, Tanya, and Diane with me gave me strength. I wasn't alone anymore. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Officer Martinez. She had dark, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that was somehow comforting. She listened without interrupting as I played the recording, her expression remaining professional and neutral. Her face remained impassive, but I noticed her jaw tighten when Melissa's voice could be heard shoving Emma into the wall. She examined the medical reports and photos of my burns, then asked to speak with the children. This was the part I dreaded most. I didn't want them to have to talk about what they'd witnessed, but Officer Martinez explained that their testimony would be crucial. She brought in a child psychologist to speak with them separately, in a kid-friendly interview room filled with toys and colorful furniture designed to put children at ease. I waited anxiously, imagining what they might be saying, hoping they weren't too scared or confused by all the questions. While the kids were being interviewed, Officer Martinez took my formal statement. I told her everything, the years of escalating abuse, the threats, the isolation. I described how Melissa had gradually cut me off from friends and family, how she'd control what I wore and who I spoke to, how she monitored my phone and email. I showed her my journal and the photos I'd managed to save of previous injuries, explaining how Melissa would always have a plausible explanation ready. I fell down the stairs. I walked into a door. I cut myself while cooking. Officer Martinez asked tough questions, but I never felt like she doubted me. When I finished, she looked me directly in the eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said. I want you to know that we take domestic violence seriously, regardless of the gender of the victim. What you've experienced is criminal abuse, and we're going to help you. Her words were professional, but there was genuine compassion behind them. I nearly broke down at those words. After years of believing no one would help me, hearing that validation from a law enforcement officer was overwhelming. It was as if a weight I'd been carrying for so long suddenly lifted, allowing me to breathe freely for the first time in years. The next few hours were a blur. Officer Martinez explained they needed to locate and question Melissa, and they'd be filing for an emergency protective order based on the evidence I'd provided. The twins were returned to me after their interviews, both looking emotionally drained but somehow lighter, as if telling their story had released something heavy they'd been carrying. Jack climbed into my lap immediately, careful of my bandaged burns, while Emma leaned against my side, her small hand finding mine. You did so good, I told them, my voice thick with emotion. I'm so proud of you both. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they knew we weren't going back home, and that seemed to be enough for now. Diane advised us to stay somewhere Melissa wouldn't think to look. Ray's place was too obvious. It would be the first place she'd check. Ray suggested his sister Sarah's apartment, the one who had helped connect me with resources in the first place. She lived about an hour away in a secure building with controlled access. We agreed it was our best option for the night. The drive to Sarah's place was tense. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Melissa's car following us. The twins fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the emotional day. Ray drove while I sat in the passenger seat, my burns making it too painful to handle the steering wheel for long periods. We didn't talk much, both lost in our thoughts about what would happen next. Sarah was waiting for us when we arrived, her apartment ready with a pull-out couch for me and a small air mattress for the twins. She had even bought new toothbrushes and pajamas for the kids, thinking ahead to what we might need. The simple kindness of that gesture nearly broke me. I hadn't experienced that kind of thoughtfulness in so long. Thank you, I managed to say as she showed us around. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this. Sarah just shook her head. You don't have to, she said simply. I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough to know what it's like. There was understanding in her eyes that made me feel less alone. That night, I slept fitfully, waking at every small noise, convinced it was Melissa somehow finding us. The twins slept curled together on the air mattress, their small bodies intertwined like they were still in the womb. I watched them breathing, their faces peaceful in sleep, and promised myself I would do whatever it took to give them the safe, loving home they deserved. Morning brought news from Officer Martinez. They had located Melissa at our house and brought her in for questioning. When confronted with the recording and the medical evidence, she had initially tried to claim I was the abusive one, that she had acted in self-defense. But the evidence was too overwhelming, especially with the twins' statements collaborating what was heard on the recording. They were holding her for now, and the prosecutor was reviewing the case for formal charges. The relief I felt was immediate, but short-lived. Diane called shortly after with a reality check. This was just the beginning of what would likely be a long legal battle. Melissa had already contacted her parents, who were wealthy enough to hire an expensive lawyer. They were pushing the narrative that I was an unstable father who had manipulated the children into lying. We need to file for emergency custody right away, Diane explained. The protective order will help, but we need to establish you as the primary caregiver before her parents can intervene. She warned me that cases like mine were still challenging, despite the evidence. The court system had improved in recognizing male victims of domestic violence, but biases remained. I spent the next few days in a strange limbo, trying to create some sense of normalcy for the twins while navigating a maze of legal procedures. Sarah's apartment became our temporary sanctuary. She worked from home as a graphic designer, which meant she was around to help with the kids while I attended meetings with Diane and dealt with the police. Ray brought over clothes and toys from our house when Melissa was in custody, sneaking in and out quickly to avoid her noticing anything missing when she was released on bail. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. Diane helped me prepare, coaching me on what to expect and how to respond to likely questions. She warned me that Melissa's lawyer would try to paint me as unstable or vindictive, that they might bring up any past arguments or mistakes to discredit me. The thought of facing Melissa in court terrified me, but the alternative, the twins being returned to her care, was unthinkable. The day before the hearing, I received a call from my parents. I hadn't spoken to them in months. Melissa had gradually isolated me from them, claiming they were too critical of her. They had seen a local news report about the case. Apparently, domestic violence involving a male victim was still unusual enough to make the evening news, and were frantic with worry. Why didn't you tell us? My mom asked, her voice breaking. We could have helped you. I didn't know how to explain that Melissa had convinced me they wouldn't believe me, that they'd take her side because she was so good at playing the perfect wife and mother in public. Instead, I just said, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. They insisted on coming to the hearing for support, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a real family again. Not just the twins, but my parents, Ray, Sarah, even Diane had become part of my support system. I wasn't alone anymore. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble floors and echoing hallways. I wore my best suit, the burns on my neck and hands still visible despite long sleeves. The twins were with a court-appointed child advocate for the day, which was both a relief and a source of anxiety. I didn't want them to have to see their mother, but I also hated being separated from them. When Melissa entered the courtroom with her lawyer and parents, my heart nearly stopped. She looked nothing like the raging woman who had thrown boiling water at me. Instead, she was the picture of a grieving mother, hair neatly styled, wearing a conservative dress, eyes downcast. Her parents flanked her protectively, her father's hand on her shoulder in a show of support. The contrast between her public and private personas was jarring, even though I'd seen it countless times before. The hearing was grueling. Melissa's lawyer tried every tactic Diane had warned me about, suggesting I was mentally unstable, that I had orchestrated the recording to frame Melissa, that I was the real abuser. They brought up times I'd raised my voice during arguments, twisted normal parenting disagreements into evidence of my controlling nature. Each accusation felt like a physical blow, but then Diane presented our evidence. The recording was played in full, Melissa's voice echoing through the courtroom as she threatened me, as she shoved our daughter into a wall. The medical reports detailing my burns were entered into evidence, along with photos showing the progression of healing over the past week. The child psychologist who had interviewed Emma and Jack testified about their accounts of witnessing abuse, their fear of their mother, their nightmares. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, listened to everything without revealing her thoughts. When all evidence had been presented, she called a brief recess to review everything before making her decision. Those 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat in the hallway with my parents and Ray, too nervous to speak, my dad's hand occasionally squeezing my shoulder in silent support. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression remained neutral as she delivered her ruling. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I am granting the emergency protective order for Mr. Thompson and the minor children. Temporary full custody is awarded to the father, with the mother to have no contact pending further hearings and completion of a psychological evaluation and anger management program. The relief that flooded through me was so intense, I nearly collapsed. Melissa, on the other hand, lost the composed facade she'd maintained throughout the hearing. "You can't take my children!" she screamed, lunging toward the judge's bench. Her lawyer tried to restrain her, but she shoved him away. "He's lying!" "They're all lying." Court officers moved quickly to intervene as she continued shouting threats and accusations. Her public meltdown only reinforced everything I had testified about. The judge watched with a grim expression before ordering the officers to remove her from the courtroom. As they escorted her out, still screaming, I caught a glimpse of her parents' faces. For the first time, they looked uncertain, as if seeing a side of their daughter they hadn't recognized before. Outside the courthouse, I finally broke down. The stress of the past week, the years of abuse, the fear and uncertainty, it all came crashing down at once. Ray put his arm around my shoulders while my mom held my hand, both of them steady presences as I tried to pull myself together. "It's not over," Diane reminded me gently. "This is just temporary custody. We'll need to prepare for the full hearing, and there will likely be supervised visitation at some point if she completes the required programs. The court will review the case in 90 days, and will need to show you've established a stable environment for the children." She was right, of course. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, it felt like we had a chance. Picking up the twins from the child advocate was emotional. They ran to me the moment they saw me, both talking at once, asking if we could go home now. The question caught me off guard. Our house didn't feel like home anymore, too filled with painful memories. "We're going to find a new home," I told them, kneeling to their level despite the pain in my still healing burns. "Somewhere that's just for us, where we can be happy and safe." The next few months were challenging but healing. We stayed with my parents temporarily, while I found a small apartment near the twins' preschool. I took a leave of absence from work to focus on helping the kids adjust and attending the required court appointments and therapy sessions. My boss was surprisingly understanding once I explained the situation, even offering to hold my position for as long as I needed. Melissa was charged with domestic assault and child endangerment. She eventually accepted a plea deal that required her to complete extensive therapy and anger management before she could petition for supervised visitation. Her parents, who had initially been her strongest supporters, gradually distanced themselves as more evidence of her behavior came to light. I felt a complicated mix of emotions about that: sadness for her, relief for us, a strange empathy for her parents, who were struggling to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the person revealed in court. The twins started therapy with a specialist in childhood trauma. Emma slowly began talking more, her vocabulary expanding as she felt safer expressing herself. Jack's nightmares decreased, though they still happened occasionally. They asked about their mother sometimes, confused questions that broke my heart. I tried to answer honestly but age-appropriately, following the therapist's guidance about not demonizing Melissa while still validating their experiences. 6 months after we left, I was unpacking boxes in our new apartment when I found an old photo album. Inside were pictures from our wedding, from when the twins were born, from family vacations, moments that had seemed happy at the time. I sat on the floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, looking at these snapshots of a life that had seemed perfect from the outside, but had been rotting from within. Emma found me there, climbing into my lap and pointing at a photo of Melissa, holding her as a baby. "Is Mommy still mad at us?" she asked, her small face serious. "No, sweetie," I said carefully. "Mommy has some big feelings she's learning to handle better. It's not your fault she got mad. It was never your fault." She considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I like our new home better," she declared. "Nobody yells here." That simple statement hit me hard. I hugged her close, marveling at children's resilience, their ability to adapt and heal when given safety and love. Jack joined us a moment later, asking what we were looking at, and soon we were going through the album together, the twins giggling at photos of themselves as babies. That night, after they were asleep, I called Ray to thank him again for everything he'd done. "I don't know where we'd be if you hadn't noticed something was wrong," I told him honestly. "That's what friends are for," he said simply. "How are you really doing?" I thought about it before answering. Better, I said finally. Not great yet, but better. And it was true. The burns had healed, leaving scars that would fade with time. The legal battles continued, but each ruling had gone in our favor so far. The twins were healing, and so was I. There were still hard days when I jumped at loud noises, when I checked the locks multiple times before bed, when I woke from nightmares about Melissa finding us. But there were good days too, increasingly so. Days when the twins laughed without restraint, when I went hours without thinking about the past, when I could imagine a future that wasn't defined by fear. I wasn't naive enough to think our struggles were over. Melissa would eventually complete her court-ordered programs and petition for visitation. The twins would face new challenges as they grew older and understood more about what had happened. I would continue dealing with the aftermath of trauma, learning to trust again, figuring out how to be both mother and father to two kids who had seen too much too young. But for the first time in years, I felt hope. Not just the desperate hope that had kept me going during the worst times, but a real, solid belief that we would be okay, that the three of us would build something new together, something healthy and whole. That was enough for now. One day at a time, we were reclaiming our lives.